Just as a reminder to everyone, as Dr. Prather brings up his presentation today, all of our Ranchers Thursday Lunchtime series have been recorded. And if you're looking for a specific topic or want to take advantage of those, or maybe can't join us next Thursday, you can see those recordings at beef.okstate.edu. We also hope you had a chance to maybe take down a few notes of some of the other extension offerings that we have really kind of released within recent months or just a few days ago. We've got a new podcast. I encourage you to take a look at that. Our Ag Econ group has some new financial plannings. We've got a new online course on prescribed fire. And if you have any questions on those and didn't have a chance to take down that contact information, certainly let us know. Dr. Lallman and I happy to get you connected with the right information there. That's all available, of course, on the Extension website, and more specifically, our Beef Extension website again is beef.okstate.edu. So Dr. Prather, are you ready to go?
I'm ready when you're ready.
All right. Go ahead and start your video if you don't mind.
It's telling me that the host has stopped it.
It's giving us problems again. Hold on just a second.
Are you able to see the screen share yet?
We can see the screen share just fine,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, try it now. I made him a co-host.
Okay, perfect.
There we go.
There we go.
How's that?
Looking great, looking great. Well, it's really my privilege today to introduce Dr. Richard Prather. Dr. Prather received his bachelor's in 1982 and his DVM from Oklahoma State University in 1986. Dr. Richard's wife, as he is affectionately known, is Dr. Angie, and they are the Doctors Prather. They joined Dr. John Kirkpatrick, a good friend and mentor of mine as well, at Ellis County Animal Hospital in 1987. Dr. Richard and Dr. Angie have owned and operated their mixed animal rural practice together in Shattuck since 1990. The Doctors Prather have dedicated their entire careers following the foundation laid by mentoring veterinarians to provide evidence-based medicine and compassionate animal care. The vision for their practice is to provide clients the opportunity to make the best possible informed decisions. And Dr. Prather's practice focus has been on sustainable herd health and production medicine. He serves on numerous industry and pharmaceutical advisory boards and was named the Oklahoma Veterinary Medical Association's Food Animal Practitioner of the Year in 2004. So Dr. Prather, we really thank you for taking the time out of a busy practice day, I'm sure, in Shattuck to join us and bring us up to date on reproductive tract scoring and your ongoing work in that area. So Dr. Prather, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Biggs. Thank you, Dr. Lallman. Appreciate the opportunity to participate in your Ranchers Thursday series. You know, looking at the topics that you've picked for these episodes, they're a wonderful set of pieces of practical and useful information that should help our rural communities not only be sustainable, but to also thrive. As I look back over the years of being in a small community and all the small communities that most of our clients drive through in the rural parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and so on, you see these communities where the downtowns are diminishing and the school buses are less and less populated. And hopefully the set of series that you've outlined a great set here over the next several weeks. Bert Teichert's topics last week really focused on ranching for profit, and if we can be profitable, then perhaps as we get into some of the things we're going to talk about today, we can help the next generation want to come back and do the things that we loved and enjoyed and that have been a great way of life for all of us thus far. As I mentioned, one of the key emphasis from Bert's topic last week was the profitability of ranches. So I thought we might start our discussion today by introducing some of the reasons why we need to build our herds with more forward thinking, as well as look at a really simple tool in choosing the better candidates for breeding, and then selecting the females that need to leave the ranch and go on to the feeding sector. We'll look primarily at university studies on that and how they've applied their research and how they've applied their data. And we'll compare those results on how we've used them on a daily basis with our clients. And just very grateful for the clientele that's in Northeast Texas, Southwest Kansas, and Northwest Oklahoma that has utilized our services and let us implement a lot of these research techniques and be able to tweak them and make them manageable and practical. So with that, we'll try to get started and move on to the next slide as to why we want to help the next generation stay in these rural communities. It's been a great place for me to raise my family, and we're grateful for the clientele and how they have embraced us and embraced the science and embraced the technology that is out there. But if you look at some data sets from around the United States, you can see that our population where we live out here with mostly cows is not the population that we sell our product to. And that is continuing to change. And if you look at these numbers, our rural communities, these small towns and these small town businesses will continue to struggle if we don't offer some opportunity for our children and our grandchildren to come back out here and make a living doing what we do and what we love. And the primary reason that I've seen over the years is, you know, if you take this dairy here that was once a thriving dairy in Western Oklahoma, one of the better dairies in the state, actually. This particular dairy was always in the top 3 or the top 10 of per month production of his Holstein cows on the DHIA records. But if you see the chart here on the right-hand side, you can see that the non-farm wage for decades now, since the mid-'80s, there's continuing to be a widening spread between non-farm wage and farm wage. So it's no wonder that now the next generation behind these former dairymen have chosen other opportunities to provide for their family. And so hopefully some of the things we'll be talking about today will help change that. So if you look at, whether you look at Oklahoma State Extension's research, and thanks to the good folks there that put these data sets together, you can see why our industry is volatile. If you look at this blue line, you can see how the number of cows in the United States, the entire United States on a cow-calf basis, typically as that group of females gets higher, our ability to generate revenue gets lower. The old adage of supply and demand, it's not difficult to see. As those cow numbers come down, you can see that the ability to be profitable on a per head return per cow in the pasture comes back up. Cows go back up, profitability goes down. Supply and demand is always in rural. Exceptions are, you can see here during the period of the drought that we experienced out in this part of the state, from here all the way to the Dakotas. If you were able to hold on to inventory during that severe drought period, you were able to generate some pretty decent revenue. But what we want to talk about today is sustainability, and how do we, over the long haul, be able to manage our herds so that regardless of what black swan or what unforeseeable, what unpredictable, what unmanageable event comes our way, how can we better be prepared to sustain ourselves during the lean times and position ourselves to be more profitable during the good economic windows. So K-State, Kansas State University did some really nice work here a few years ago. And so this busy little slide, each one of these different colored lines here represents one of the cattle cycles. So over the period of decades, they managed from clear back in the 30s and the 40s to all the way up to the recent cow cycle. to look at how long do those cycles last? When do cow numbers go up? When do they go down? And on the average, it'll last around 8 to 10 years. The longest one being 14 years over here, but most of them are in an 8 to 10 year window here, where cow numbers come up, cow numbers go down. And like we just saw, profitability goes down and profitability goes up when the two are opposing each other. And so if you read some of the trade magazines like Beef Magazine, that's where Bert Teichert has published a lot of his work over the years. And I really enjoy reading Bert's articles. I really enjoy reading Harlan Hughes' articles. I think they both have great insight. Harlan Hughes is telling us that the trigger for buying or building your herd is 5 years roughly before the next cycle peak, which they're saying is now. A recent article of Beef Magazine that Harlan espoused was that we need to be buying cows at this window of time in order to have them ready to have their calves and be at the, if you will, catch the next wave of profitability. So we're going to talk about the rest of the time that we have together in how do we do that. Now we can, if we're fortunate enough to have non-ag revenue on our properties that we can participate in, that will help with our sustainability. Or we can increase our production, which we've done over the years. You know, if you look at this 1959 picture of Dr. Kirkpatrick and his champion Hereford at the Tulsa State Fair, for those of us that have been in Tulsa at those age, we remember those old barns that they had there, and we remember that type of cattle. Now, Dr. Kirkpatrick's not the tallest person in the world, and you can see what his champion calf looked like then versus what a champion calf looks like now. We've increased production tremendously, probably to the point where we're not significantly going to increase how many pounds of beef we can put per acre. But we have to start looking at managing our costs. And that's what we refer to as production medicine. We want to look at how can we do what we do and manage our costs. And animal science and the good people at OSU Extension have given us lots of tools over the years to work with. Everything from pelvic measurement to calving ease direct or CED, birth weight, EPDs, reproductive tract scoring, artificial insemination through estrus synchronization. And we'll spend just a bit of time on it, but I don't want to steal anybody's thunder from the coming weeks. That's coming, looks like in about 2 more weeks. They'll talk in detail on estrus synchronization. But you know, the next generation of veterinarians behind me, these are excellent skill sets that they have. These young veterinarians coming out, they can't wait to be able to provide you with the opportunity to do a C-section and demonstrate the skill that they have in getting a live calf on the ground and sending you home a live heifer or a live cow. But what the industry needs is tools that do not incentivize poor animal husbandry. If you get to the point where you've missed that opportunity and that calf is dead and you have to take him out piece by piece, all we did was salvage the cow. If you get to the point where this heifer has to have a C-section, again, we might have saved the calf and we might have saved the cow, but we didn't manage your cost well. So we think that there are more tools out there that are more sustainable and they're better skill sets. And we'll spend some time talking about those. The reason I bring that up is one of our dairymen that we first broke out here from Community Jersey Farms in Gage, Oklahoma. He decided many decades ago that if he was going to compete with his Jersey cows, he was going to have to find a cow that could produce better and had an udder that was an udder that would be sustainable over the years, had feet that were sustainable over years, and a cow that would breed. And so he went out and he found that cow and he bred off of that cow's, genetics. And in the late 50s, the veterinarians that started in this area told me that there used to be over 150 dairies. We only have one dairy that's remaining standing, and this is the dairy that's still there. So his philosophy was that great cows are like great treasures. They are where you find them, and they're hard to come by. So if we look at what it'll take to create a great beef female, we want a cow that is optimal in the amount of labor and time that we have to spend with her. We want a cow that will have successful outcomes when we try to breed her. We want her to breed early, and then she has to thrive. She has to calve unassisted, she has to stay in the herd, and she has to sell a calf that will stay healthy. Because the folks that I broke out under here that are no longer in this picture, the fourth generation of these ranchers, their sons and the operations that they were running when I first moved here were primarily father-son operations. Now most of them are like they are the generation that are my children's age. They are still assisting with the ranch, but a lot of these folks still have outside jobs because the ranching by itself is not sustainable for them. So if we want this next little generation here, if we want her to have an opportunity to come back and manage the ranch, she's got to have a cow that fits these criteria. So we'll spend the next couple of minutes looking at those. So don't be overwhelmed by the numbers on this slide. What we primarily want to look at is this over here on the left-hand side, the one that I'm Xing out right now. What we're trying to find with reproductive tract scoring, and that's just a simple rectal palpation where we go in and we feel of the reproductive tract of these young females, and we determine, does she have an ovary that's the size of a peanut, or does she have an ovary that's as big as the end of your thumb? And if they do that, and they have a uterus that's a viable size uterus, that's the female that we were looking for. And this is not new information. This information has been around for decades, but it's been well proven over the years. Whenever, back to people like Bert Teichert and Harlan Hughes, when I see those people writing or when I hear that they're going to be speaking, I listen. Another one in reproduction is the good folks up at the University of Missouri and their extension, and David Patterson here. When David Patterson speaks about reproduction, I listen because he's done some really, really wonderful work over the years. This being one example here. What they did here was over a period of 2010 through 2016, so 11, 12, 13, all those years there, they looked at nearly 30,000 heifers that they have done the reproductive tract scores that we just talked about. Do they have a score of 1 or do they have a score of 5, or where does it fall in between? And then they looked at how did their preg rates shake out over time based off of a single breeding, not a watching 12 hours and breed off of observed heat, because that's not labor efficient. We'll come back to that in a minute. But off of a fixed time AI, you set them all up, you get them all ready, you run them all through in one day and you breed them. If they had one of those little tiny ovaries, they had a 6% pregnancy rate, versus if they had out here ovaries that are showing us at the 1 year of age that they're ready to breed, they've entered puberty, they've had more than one heat. You can see at least 5 times or more the preg rate, and these are pregnancy rates that we can live with. Another group up in Washington State repeated the same kind of data, except they looked at it just slightly differently. They looked at it over an 85-day breeding season and compared it with natural service following AI or natural service only. Same results though. If those heifers had the small ovaries, the peanut and almond-sized ovaries, and they bred them off of a single AI, they had a 40% preg rate. Now this is including both the tiny, tiny ones and the ones that are starting to show some signs of puberty. They had a 40% preg rate. Versus those mature ovaries that have had multiple heats by the time you breed them, they had demonstrated on 1,200 head, they're clear up to 60% or greater pregnancy rate. Now, if you look at the bulls, there wasn't a single breeding, but over the breeding season, this is not uncommon at all in our herds around here to have an 80% preg rate off of your heifers, and we'll get back to the economics of that, and a 90% preg rate off of the more mature ones. But this is over a period of 85 days and pretty comparable at the end of a breeding season, what those preg rates might come out. Now, when we talk about fixed time AI, and they'll go into this in more detail in a couple of weeks, at the Applied Reproductive Strategies Beef Cattle Conference in 2015, they looked at a lot of the different techniques that are out there, and you can pick up any AI sire catalog and you can see these techniques for synchronizing your heifers for a single day breeding. The one that we've chosen and the one that we like the best is this 14-day seeder, and you breed 33 days after you start your process. The reason we like this one the best is because it reduces the amount that we have to go in and do any sorting. We're not trying to go into a pen of females, whether it be 10 head or whether it be 100 head, and pull out the ones that are ready to breed this morning, the effort, the time, the stress on the cattle, etc., to accomplish that, nor do we spend the time of detecting who is and who isn't in heat at the moment. Because what we want to do is utilize the least amount of labor and the most efficient use of our time. The reason that we've chosen that 14-day seeder, that's a 30-day program, is the groups again in Missouri, Dr. Patterson and their efforts to work through the multiple synchronization programs that we just designed there. This is the same thing here. They looked at the 7-day seeder, feeding MGA to replace the seeder, so you don't have the labor of running a cow in or a heifer in and putting a seeder in. And their results showed that it is different when you have a seeder versus feeding MGA, and that's the same kind of thing that we found in our hands, especially out here where it's dry and windy. This particular product's really powdery, and unless you make a premix that you can hold it together and hold it in your ration, and you can make sure that all your heifers are consuming the same amount, we've seen the same results that they have here with better pregnancy rates here. But the thing that this slide is showing again is those younger, more immature reproductive tracts have less pregnancies than those more mature pregnancies. So we took our data, and we could spend hours talking about all the data that Michael Adams, our assistant, that he's an Oklahoma Panhandle State University graduate, been with us several years now, and he manages all our data, all our reproductive scheduling and so on, and he does a terrific job managing my data, and I'm grateful for him for getting this slide together. But just to keep it simple and keep it short today, we thought we'd look at just this year's heifers, and only this year's heifers that we were able to get in there and pregnancy check early enough that we could distinguish. Did she settle from the AI, or did she settle from the first time the bull bred her following the AI at 21 days? Or did she settle from the second time that the bull bred her at 42 days after the AI? So we went in, and not only do we manage these heifers for small reproductive tract scores, they don't get into the pool that's going to be allowed to bred. They go straight to the sale barn, as do the ones with small pelvises, which are very high risk for cesarean section or for having to have a calf pull. Put those out of the little over 450 head that we did, 85 of those were removed for small pelvis and or small reproductive tract score, for an average about 20%. Now, for the herds that have done this year in and year out, this number starts to go down. But for herds that are just beginning to look at this kind of early forward thinking, this is pretty typical, and sometimes even higher. We'll see in the 20 to 25% range some years. For the herds, again, that have done this over a long period of time, we've got herds now that aren't keeping any pelvises that are smaller than a 75-pound birth weight at 2 years of age. So it's been a very effective tool, and hopefully they'll talk about that some more in the genetics discussions later on. So off of a single day AI, using the protocol that we just showed, the 33-day total synchronization timeline, we were able to achieve 58% preg rates off of 1 day breeding on 214 females out of 371. The thing that we do, on the heifers that we breed AI for the commercial herds, we're not necessarily interested in only the AI calf. If that ranch has done a good job of selecting their cleanup bull for low birth weight, high calving ease direct numbers, and the other production numbers that they're seeking for their herd, whether she settled on the day that I AI'd or shortly thereafter is irrelevant. So we'll set these heifers up to breed, and we'll turn the bulls in 24 hours later, because nothing's perfect. Nothing's 100%. You're going to have some of the ones that you synchronize that are going to cycle over the next 2, 3, 4, and 5 days. And we want that bull to go ahead and catch them so that we don't miss out on that 21 days of revenue for average daily gain. So the breeding season preg rate after we turn those heifers out, and this is off of a 42-day breeding season. So if we breed on day 0 of our timed AI, the bull has an opportunity to breed her for the next 21 days, and again the next 21 days after that. So now we're up to 42 days. In 42 days, we have 83% of those heifers are pregnant and ready to stay in the herd with a 17% cull rate. And if you look at the National Animal Health Monitoring System data, the open rate in heifers nationwide is 17%. So if you turn a bull out and you let him breed for 90 days, you've got a mathematical chance that you're going to have 17% of those heifers are culled. If you look at the data we have of our synchronized heifers that we have gone in and determined are they ready and capable to breed, we have the same data, and we have it done in 42 days or less. Some herds are even accomplishing this in 21 days off of 2 breedings. One of the things that really helps us get there in those herds that are having those exceptional numbers and that are averaging good 75 and 85% preg rate over multiple years is the presence of these ugly old gomers. Now we fix these bulls, and that's why he's called a gomer. We fix him so that he can't physically exteriorize his self so that he can breed the heifers, and we do a vasectomy, epididyectomy on him so that he's sterile, but we let him run with those heifers from weaning until we're ready to breed. And that's off of work here that was also done by Brierly years and years ago, that the pheromones that this bull secretes, and how that works, I don't know. How a bull knows that a mile away he can stand at the fence and smell a heifer that's over there. Those pheromones also stimulate those females to start maturing earlier. And if a heifer is on the first heat of puberty, she's never had a heat before, this is the first time she's ever been in heat, 43% of those heifers will come back in heat again, versus if she is on her 3rd heat, only 22% of those heifers. So you get twice the number of heifers that will not return to heat by running them with these gomer bulls. So pubertal heifers remains critical to keeping our breeding and our success rates on those AIs efficient. Now you might get a call from your neighbor when you stick one of these ugly old guys out there with your heifers, and he's got his heifers next door, and you might get a call saying, hey, what's going on next door there? But don't worry, they're sterile. So let's look at some of the data that, again, back up in the Northwest that they did several years ago, fairly recently. They looked at 4,000 head of Angus heifers. They're all about the same age. They're off multiple locations. They did the reproductive tract scores about a month ahead of breeding, and they looked at them over 4 different seasons here. And they fed them all pretty consistently, regardless of location. And their goal was to look at, can they control labor costs through fixed time AI and have those animals only handled to get their medications and only handled to get their one-time breeding, and then you're out. They had 2,600 head in the AI, again, followed by the bulls were turned out immediately following. And one thing to note here is they only had 1 bull per 40 head of heifers that they left out after that timed AI, and they left them out for 85 days from the time that they AI'd them. Then they also had another roughly 1,300, almost 1,400 head of heifers that was not synchronized and running with the bull for 85 days, but the bull ratio was 1 to 20. So twice as many bulls in that group. Then they ultrasound preg checked them all, and they ultrasound pregged them all twice, 70 days and again 2 months after the end of the breeding season. And all the bulls were comparable. They'd been semen evaluated, trick tested, fed well, etc. So they standardized as much as they possibly could and looked at the difference between that 2,700 head versus this 1,400 head and a synchronized breeding. These that were synchronized, timed AI one time, followed by a bull running with them for 85 days, on the average, were pregnant 25 days earlier than the natural sire only group. Now, 25 days may not sound like much, but if you look at it from multiple angles, on day 0, on the average, because we're getting our 58% preg rate off of our AI, and then we turn the bull out right behind it, and he catches those other 3 or 4 or 5 days behind us, we're getting 61% of those heifers are bred here on day 0 of your breeding season, which also translates to day 0 of your calving season. Not quite, because the gestations aren't always 284 days. Matter of fact, a lot of these low birth weight bulls are a full 21 days ahead because they're short gestational, but that's a whole nother topic. But regardless, this is the big issue. When you turn out these are actual numbers off of herds that have allowed us to pregnancy check early enough that we can determine there's several hundred head in each of these curves. By 21 days, if you're just letting the bull out, these heifers have never been exposed to a bull from weaning to breeding, and their first exposure to a bull starts the day that you turn him out. By 21 days, their first opportunity to repeat, they've only got 30% of those bred versus we're already at 83% bred. So if you look at, we're pretty fortunate out here. We have multiple auction markets that run good numbers of cattle. So we have good data behind these numbers. This is a multi-year analysis of one of our nearby auction markets. And you can see 2018, pretty good year up here in the blue. We were rocking along here in the $1.60s. Sure like to get that again this year if we could. 2019 is this one in the green. And then this purple one down here at the bottom, you can see what happened to us with the black swan of the coronavirus. And then the red one here is an average of them all. So what difference does 25 days make? You can see long about the time August rolls around in the western part of the state out here, it starts to get dry. When we start to get dry, cattle start to hit those auction markets. There's not a whole lot of place to go with them except feed yards. So those prices obviously come under pressure about mid-August every year. Then what happens after August? Kind of stabilizes a little bit. Typically we'll get into early September, maybe catch a few rains, maybe have a little bit of early wheat pasture, and those that have irrigated pivots, that they can get some wheat pasture, so there's a little place to go with those cattle. But you can see from middle to late September to the end of the year, things get pretty wonky at the auction markets out here. You know, there's a lot of volatility out here. There's a lot of risk. And if we could have those calves gone here by the middle of September versus having them gone by the middle of October, we've decreased our risk that we're going to have an event that would knock the floor out of what we're asking for those prices. We just look at this year, when we were able to survive the early phase of all the college campuses, college cafeterias, restaurants, high school cafeterias, national chain restaurants, all of those things put a lot of pressure on our cattle because there was no place to go with those killed cattle. Since there was no place to go with those killed cattle, excuse me, there was also going to be a big backlog when we finally started getting those cattle killed again. Estimates are we had somewhere around 1 million head of cattle here that didn't kill, that now they're finally being killed. And that's also when we're getting dry and we're getting lots of our weaned calves hit the market. So if we're trying to manage cost, we look at everything that it costs us to do that AI. We looked at our semen, we looked at our drugs, we looked at our labor, and it runs around $66 a head on the average. If you look at our bulls, this is an average. We have some really great seed stock producers out here, 3 different breeds of seed stock producers. Part of the world will run about $3,800 a year. And that doesn't include a premium that you might pay for a high CED or a low birth weight bull. On average out here, they'll last about 6 years. So if you buy him as a yearling, you'll get 5 years out of him. If you buy him as a 2-year-old, you'll get 6 years out of him. Looking at all the things that can happen to him during the course of the year, how much you have to feed him. Your average bull cost per cow, even if he gets 100% of those cows bred, is going to be about $75. So our AI didn't cost us any more. But if we look at going back in those females that we worked hard to find, those great females with those reproductive tract scores, big ovaries, big uteruses, by the time we turn them out and start AI on them, pardon me, we're going to be able to keep those females in the herd longer. So this top line is the females that had pregnancies in the early first 21 days of the breeding season. The bottom line is the ones that were in the second and third breeding season. So by the time they come around to their second calving season, so she's a 2-year-old now, ready to calve as a 3-year-old. We've already lost 10% of those females that were born or bred in the second 21 days are out of the herd and cold. By the time she's a 4-year-old and ready to have her third calf, we've lost another 10% of those. So now, by the time she's 4 years old, 20% of those females that we started with 2 years ago calving out are gone. That means everybody else that stayed in the herd has to bear the cost in the calf and the pounds that she weans. Another way to look at it is if she breeds during the first 21 days of her early calving, of her early breeding, she'll stay in the herd a year longer than her sister who didn't breed until the second or the third 21 days. Why does that matter? If you go back to work that Cushman and Funston did up at the Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska, they looked at these heifers over again. This is 9 years entire life of a cow. Her first calf here is a 2-year-old, second, third, so on. If you look at the heifer that calved in the first 21 days, she weighed 470 pounds versus her sister in the same year that calved in the third 21 days, 330 pounds. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of dollars that we leave on the table. And what each one of these little stars up here at the top means is that is a statistically different weight, both in the first 21 days, second 21 days, and third 21 days. It takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years for these heifers that didn't calve until the second and third 21 days to catch up with the heifer that calved in the first 21 days. Why this data isn't just screaming all over the place, up and down throughout the ranchers' communication signals, I don't know, but this is a lot of profitability. When Bert Teichert is last week talked about there's better ways that we can try to manage our, this is one of the better ways that he was saying, pelvic measuring and reproductive tract scoring. There's a lot of profitability in a very simple tool. So we put this to work, and we're almost finished here. We put this to work in a ranch that back during the drought basically had to sell off half of the herd because of wildfires and dry grass conditions or dry conditions and minimal grass forage availability. So basically we've got 150 head in one side of the herd and we got 150 head in the other side of the herd. 150 head are managed as just bull breds. They're take-in cattle, leased cattle. And then the 150 that the ranch still owns of their own are managed in the manner that we just discussed. So when those cattle off of the bull bred herd, 150 cows versus the AI bred herd, 150 cows and heifers were compared that year, there was a 93-pound difference in the weaning weight of those steers. At the local auction market, that was $1.56 a pound that year in 2019. 93 pounds at $1.56, plus the heifers that were too small pelvises or too immature reproductive tracts. $13,000 difference between a simple conventional bull bred herd for 150 head and a 150 head of AI cows and heifers. Now, when Dr. Angie and I left Oklahoma State 35 years ago. Wow, where did that go? We were 2. Now we are 10. And just like the national statistics that we looked at earlier, 50% of our family lives urban and 50% of our family lives rural. I know there's a lot of ranchers that have been great to work with us and have let us serve them over the years that would like to be able to maintain at least 50% of their offspring come back to the ranch and do what they do and enjoy the life, the safety, the good health, and just the great opportunities that this way of life presents out here. Hopefully what we discussed today gives you an opportunity to give this generation a chance to do what we've enjoyed. And with that, Dr. Biggs, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Dr. Prather. I absolutely love the blend of practical information, focus on females. That's my area. I think sometimes the bulls get all the glory, but the females do all the work. So my dad always recommended putting the money in your females when you can. And so we do have a couple of questions, and so we've got, a variety of operators on the call today. So talk to us, if we're not using reproductive tract scoring already in our operation, like where do you recommend we start? And what age do we need to be looking at these heifers? How do we approach incorporating that into our operation? It looks like we maybe lost Dr. Prather on our internet connection, so we'll hang out just a second. We'll see if we can get him back on.
Sure, he'll log right back in.
Would encourage the group today, if you do have a question, please feel free to type that into the chat or the Q&A, and we will get that to Dr. Prather. Any questions that we don't get answered today, feel free to send those to Dr. Lallman or myself, and we will get that information to you. Having spent time, and you see Dr. Prather join us again yet, Dr. Lallman?
No, not yet. Dr. Biggs, let's pick on Dr. Thomas. I saw Dr. Jordan Thomas on here. Would you allow him to speak? Let's see if he is
certainly
able to join us. I've got a question I think would be interesting for him.
All right, Dr. Thomas, we've moved you over, and we've put you on the spot. So Dr. Lallman, ask away.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, thanks for having me. I wasn't expecting to speak today, that's for sure, but I can see your intention here.
I'm sure he'll be, Dr. Prather will be right back with us. So I guess my really good presentation by Dr. Prather, and it will get him to answer the same question, but how many heifers would you be comfortable setting up in a day to synchronize an AI? Let's start there.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I want to also say that was a really nice presentation. I really enjoyed the content delivered, and not just because there was a University of Missouri nod a couple of times. No, it was a really nice collection of information, very practical. In terms of the practicality of doing an AI program in a set of heifers, it's a little bit dependent on the actual operation. So I generally suggest that you ought to think through, what is the amount of heifers that I could actually do a timed AI program on over the course of, say, 4 hours? Because if you start to go outside of that time window in terms of just the range around AI times, for a fixed time AI, that becomes a little bit problematic. We just don't have a lot of great data about what happens when that range becomes very, very large in a set of heifers with timed AI. And so, if you have a set of heifers that, let's say you have a couple hundred heifers and you can't get those physically done over the course of a a 4-hour period, I would really think about breaking that group up into smaller groups. Now that said, there's a little bit of nuance maybe around that question, just because we have different strategies to conduct an AI program, and you don't necessarily have to do a fixed time AI and inseminate all the females at one time on one day. And you could, for example, to deal with a larger group, intentionally plan to do something like a heat detection up to the point of an AI program, or so what we call a heat detection with a cleanup AI or a timed AI at the end of that heat detection period. Another realistic strategy would be something like a split time AI program, and that just involves delaying the AI time for those animals that have not expressed estrus by a standard fixed time AI. And that's another way to help spread out some of those numbers over the course of now 2 days instead of just a single day. Now, that the other little point to mention is just that, depending on the group size, it can be very challenging to do a good job of heat detection if you have very, very large groups set up.
No doubt.
And so in that case, that's the other issue with if you are going to heat detect on a group of heifers, you really visit with somebody in extension maybe who has a lot of experience doing that, or working with larger sets of heifers, and get some real world advice about what logistically is feasible for a large number of heifers. Should I consider breaking those over multiple heat detection periods? I've seen people do a very good job with large numbers of heifers with heat detection, but they also know what they're doing. So those are just some practical considerations.
So we would have a lot of producers that would have a single shoot capability. They don't have a breeding box and so on. Same question for that scenario. Would you, I'm sure you would have to trim it down even more, but what would be your thoughts there?
Yeah, so if you have just a single technician, or if you have a single shoot that you're going to be performing AI out of, and not using, say, a fancier setup with multiple technicians in a breeding barn or something like that, it just, as a consequence, it's going to limit how many head you can do in a certain amount of time. And so I think just, start to put a reasonable estimate on, how quickly can I actually AI a heifer from start to finish, that heifer coming into the chute and leaving the chute and the next one coming in. And it doesn't take very long per animal before you start to really get into an extended length period of time. And so if you do that, a little bit of that math, and you realize that you're pushing the envelope on maybe getting outside of, say, a 4-hour window, I would really encourage you to break that group of heifers up. Now, that said, a single shoot is a great way to AI heifers. I mean, don't think that that's a limitation to getting an AI project accomplished. Often technicians will say they prefer breeding heifers in a chute because of just it minimizes the bouncing around that those heifers might do in a breeding barn. So it's not a bad setup, and you can definitely accomplish an AI program in a single chute and a fairly conventional setup, but just be realistic about that group size that you try to do that in.
Okay, so it sounds like the 4-hour rule of thumb stands and kind of cuts the place to start as far as your estimate. Very good. Very good. Thank you.
I think we've got Dr. Prather back with us. Dr. Prather, we may have you on the phone and in person, but can you hear us okay there?
Okay, am I there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I muted my phone just in case I lose you again. I'll leave that line open.
All right, we've got you. We've got both the phone line and the internet connection over in the panelist host view. So I think we've got solid backup in case we have a connection issue again.
Okay, and then my video is still blocked on Dr. Lawman's end, looks like. But at any rate, one of the great things about living out where we live is we don't have real great internet. That's not all bad either.
So Dr. Prather, just as on a question, again, love the practical aspects of the presentation and economics of it as well. But if we have an operation and we're not already using reproductive tract scoring in our management practices, how do we get started? What are your recommendations there?
It's just a simple palpation. The most efficient time for us to do it that we've found for the ranchers that we work with is when you're making your final selections as a yearling heifer. So if you're January, February borns, then we'd like to get about 60 days ahead of that so that we can synchronize them with that 30-day window in there and get our last round of vaccines that we like to get in them. We'd like to get our modified live vaccines in them, sure enough, 60 days ahead of breeding if we can. If we can't, then we'll go ahead and do the vaccine at that 33-day window. But right about the time that we synchronize them, 30, 40 days ahead of when you want to have your targeted breeding date or your targeted calving date.
And just as a reminder, it's a simple palpation, not necessarily use an ultrasound. We had one question in the chat for those. I think we may have some international participation today on this call, which I think is fantastic. If we've got resource limitations, and I know you've done some international work, again, just straight palpation, right?
It's very simple. All you need is an experienced palpator that can find those juvenile reproductive tracts. The data is easily accessible. Be happy to share those resources through extension to get those article citations out to the people that want them to help their veterinarians if the veterinarians haven't seen that data yet. But it's a very simple thing. You find that reproductive tract. If it's immature, it's going to be the size of a pencil. If it's mature, it's going to be the size of your thumb. If those ovaries are the size of a peanut, or if those ovaries are the size of the end of your thumb, that's the bottom line. It's not a difficult procedure. It's not a time-consuming procedure. It doesn't take any more than a normal rectal pregnancy exam.
So when we're trying to incorporate reproductive tract scoring into the operation, and we've talked a lot about cost today, what do you figure is the average cost per heifer? And obviously there's some variability there based on who is doing the procedure and what the facilities are, et cetera. But how do you figure that into your economics?
Typically, we'll charge in the $3 to $4 a head range, just because it's not like a pregnancy diagnosis. We're not trying to determine, is this thing 30 days, is it 50 days, or is it 70 days pregnant? We're just trying to find, is what we're looking for there. So, it's not a time-consuming thing. We'll typically do our pelvic measurements at the same time. So by the time you do a pelvic measurement and a reproductive tract score, you're looking $8, $9 a head on the average. Of course, bigger numbers, price breaks, smaller numbers, more expensive, but on the average, both procedures around $8 to $9. A single reproductive tract score, you're looking at $3 to $4.
So any additional benefits on these on the herds that you've been doing the reproductive tract scoring for any length of time? Any additional advantages that maybe we haven't discussed today?
Absolutely, we didn't go into that much, but one of the advantages is over time, the heritabilities for reproductive fertility are fairly decent. So if you do reproductive tract scoring year in and year out, you're eventually going to put a population of females back into your herd that fall into that early breeding category. That the presence of the gomers are going to stimulate to be on their third heat by the time UAI. And we have herds now that have gone to only breeding their heifers once and only breeding their cows twice, and they're done. So they have a single breeding timeline come the following 9 months later to be watching heifers for. So within 10 days, all of their heifers are calved out. And within 21 days, all of their cows are calved out, because we time AI those cows on day 0. We let the bulls breed them once, and those herds are still only culling 8% of their females a year. We're still culling about 15% of the heifers, but on their herd average for their aged cows, they're still culling 8%, which is right in there above or better than the NOMS data. So if you can calve heifers in 30 days and cows in 42 days, the most you're looking at from your youngest calf to your oldest calf is around 60 to 70 days. The benefit we didn't talk about there also is on the health end. We're under tremendous pressure to manage our antibiotic use. We're under tremendous pressure to put cattle in the feed yard and try to get a bonus for the health of those cattle. Now, we're working on that data right now, trying to build the data set that demonstrates if we have a set of calves off of Ranch A that there's only 60 days difference from the youngest to the oldest calf. How do those calves perform health-wise? Did they respond to their vaccines better? Are they able to stand the challenges better when they get into the feeding sector? Because quite frankly, there's a lot of feeding cattle that they don't want ranch calves because they come in, they're too naive and they fall out of bed. So we're thinking that managing this reproductive cycle should play well into responsible antibiotic use and animal welfare in the feeding sector.
So Dr. Prather, do you have any herds that don't use reproductive tract scoring and instead turn all heifers out and then ultrasound to cull those that don't fit in the desired calving window? And how, if we're talking about a group or an operation that's not using reproductive tract scoring, how does that work in your experience as compared to those that do the reproductive tract scoring? I hope that question makes sense.
Let's see, if we can go back to sharing that screen, I think I can get to that and answer that pretty quickly. Yes, to answer your question, the short answer is yes. We do have herds that's the way they do it. I can get this done.
Which was also my question, another question, Dr. Prather, and that is, Burke recommended or suggested 30 days or even down to 21 days exposing them to bulls. So while you're at this one, or maybe at the end of it, if you don't mind just commenting on that, the advantage and disadvantage of just the short exposure versus tract score.
This slide right here. Okay. This slide right here helps answer that question, I believe. One is, in order to do that, I would highly recommend the presence of Gomer bulls because we see this number right here commonly. If these heifers have not been reproductive tract scored and they have not been running with the Gomer bull, the presence of that bull takes some time. By the time he's been there, most of the data shows those Gomers need to be out at least 70 days. So if you look here, 70 days into when that bull exposure started in this non-reproductive tract score herd, by 70 days, now we're up to the same preg rates that we were over here in the reproductive tract score herds. So if they want to do that, that is an economically viable way to do it. But to do that, they really need those Gomers out for 70 days prior to the breeding in order to achieve comparable preg rates at this level of timeline. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Our question was asked by a veterinary student. I think it's a pretty darn good question for a veterinary student. So we've got several veterinary students on the line today. I know that's your interest in developing good veterinarians, do a great job with externships at your practice. I know you get rave reviews for that. So back to the Gomers, we did have a question. You mentioned the at least 70 days. If we've got more time than that, what age on a heifer do you, if we're not so confined, what age do you turn those Gomers out with the heifers?
We turn them out at weaning. We try to have them ready, the surgical procedures done by 70 days so the Gomers are healed up good and ready to be out with those females and not cause any damage. But just for convenience sake, we turn them out at weaning and they just run all winter long with them.
All right, well, we are quickly approaching the 1:30 mark. Dr. Prather, thanks so much for being on the line with us today. Great information. If you're interested, we will have the recording up. Remind me, Dr. Lallman, if I don't get this quite right, probably early next week or so. on our beef.okstate.edu, and all our previous sessions are held there as well if you're looking for more information. So Dr. Prather, thanks again for being with us. Thanks for everyone that has joined. I know Dr. Kirkpatrick was on with us. I saw Dr. Dawson on there too. Dr. Rusk, our animal science department head, joined, and lots of other interested folks from all over. And so we appreciate your insights and wisdom and really practical application that's impacts bottom line, the sustainability in rural communities. I think it's very, very important as we talk about farm and ranch succession, that we talk about the things we discussed today. So as we look to next week, we will have Dr. Jared Decker, Associate Professor of Beef Cattle Extension Specialist from the University of Missouri. I wonder why we're getting University of Missouri folks on here. Lots of shout outs to them today. Good folks and a lot of knowledge. So we'll be visiting with Dr. Decker on the genetics of fertility, existing and developing tools. So looking forward to that. Hope you can join us then. And again, thank you all for being here today. And if you have a question that maybe wasn't answered or addressed, you're welcome to send that to us. I'll put my email address in the chat in case you need it. Dr. Lallman, anything else I may have forgotten? All right, so that sounds good. If you've got any questions, we'll hang on just a moment. We do encourage you to check out again the beef.okstate.edu for the variety of resources we have there for you, from economics to nutrition to reproduction. There's a little bit of everything, and it can hopefully help you in your operation and bottom line. So with that, thanks again for joining, and hope you have a good rest of the week, and we will see you next Thursday.
Outstanding, Dr. Prather. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I about lost my voice there.